Welcome back to BYoungMinistry.com, to another blog and to another podcast. Welcome to those who access the podcast through Apple Podcasts, Rumble, Spotify, and YouTube. Today we continue in our study of the book of Genesis. We're in chapter 31, verses 4 through 9, which reads, "So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field, to his flock, and said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not favorable toward me as before. But the God of my father has been with me, and you know that with all my might I have served your father. Yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not allow him to hurt me. If he said thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore speckled. And if he said thus, the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me." That's Genesis chapter 31, verses 4 through 9. Today we return to our study of Genesis 31, where Jacob and his family are preparing to travel to the Promised Land. They were about to do so because they had chosen to be defined by the God of the Bible, and he had told Jacob to travel to the Promised Land. It was in this context that Jacob was dealing with tensions in his broader family. His father-in-law and his sons accused Jacob falsely of stealing from his herd. We view others through the lens of the way we see life. Like Laban, Jacob's father-in-law, if we are deceptive, we will think of others as deceptive. This is the ongoing context of today's passage. In verses 4 through 7 of today's passage we read, "So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field, to his flock, and said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not favorable toward me as before. But the God of my father has been with me, and you know that with all my might I have served your father. Yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not allow him to hurt me." Jacob called for Rachel and Leah in that order. Even though she was Jacob's second wife, Rachel was the one beloved most by Jacob. Throughout this narrative, Jacob favored Rachel more than Leah. Showing favoritism within our families is a dangerous thing because it is the unfair practice of treating one better than the other. Jacob did this because his idea of love was less than it should have been. Jacob's idea was tainted with the self because it was conditioned by what he would get out of the relationship. Jacob's idea of love was less than due to the fact that his ability to evaluate was cheapened by the self-life. The words translated favoritism in the Bible literally means to receive according to the face. To show favoritism is to make judgments about another on the basis of something that's insignificant, like our outward appearance. Of course, given the circumstances and the fact that Laban tricked Jacob into marrying his first daughter, Leah, one can understand the difficulty Jacob was in. Having said that, favoritism eventually bites us in the rear end. We tend to put everyone in some kind of a category. Most often it has to do with appearance and status. According to James chapter 2 and verse 9, when we show favoritism, we commit sin. Favoritism is not simply disrespectful of people. It is sin because it is contrary to the character and command of God. Because favoritism is sin, we are wise to hurl it out of our lives. Over and over, Laban deceived Jacob to stay on his homestead for 20 years. Jacob worked so well that Laban received much good work from him. If Jacob had slacked off at any time during those 20 years, Laban never would have kept him around. But he did. When he did, Laban said that the Lord had blessed him because of Jacob's work. And the last 6 years were no different, except that the blessings went to Jacob and not to Laban. When we live our lives at the level of the world, we will eventually see that this was a very unwise decision. If we waste our time feeding the flesh rather than the spirit, we will only be miserable at the end of the day. We feed the flesh when we do the things of the flesh, like complain and treat others badly. When we feed the spirit, we do things of the spirit, like loving others and being joyful and being patient. The most exciting way to live is to simply trust God and to trust simply. Jacob trusted God, and look at what happened. Jacob was blessed abundantly. For the person who is living by faith in the God of the Bible, life is an adventure to be received from the most creative being known to man. At the end of this life, having trusted the Lord with the outcomes, we will look back with others and marvel. Perhaps with us will be those who came to faith in our God because we trusted Him. The phrase 10 times is an idiom indicating fullness of time. In the case of Laban, whenever Jacob's flock began to grow, Laban would change the rules of his wages. The gracious nature of Jacob's response to Laban's mistreatment revealed the fact that God was changing Jacob from the inside out. We call this sanctification, which is different from justification. Justification is what gets us into heaven, for we are only justified in the eyes of God through believing in the work of the Lord Jesus on the cross for the forgiveness of our sin. Sanctification is getting heaven into us now so that we might grow in the wisdom of God and that we might be able to be effective witnesses for God while we remain on this earth. In verses 8 and 9 of today's passage we read, "If he said thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore speckled. And if he said thus, the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me." The original agreement between Laban and Jacob was that all of the abnormally covered flocks would be Jacob's. However, it quickly became apparent that the majority of the new births were abnormally colored. So Laban changed it to only a portion of them. Then the next season only speckled would be born, and so Laban would say, "Okay, the speckled will be mine and the spotted will be yours." The next season they would come out all spotted. There was more than just genetic engineering on Jacob's part involved in this scenario. With the colors always coming out to Jacob's advantage, it had to be by the providence of God. Laban was fighting a losing battle because he was not fighting on the side of the Lord. He fought his battles in the flesh. His weapons of complaining and accusing were losing weapons. The God of the Bible knows every detail about you and me, and we can trust Him with every detail of our lives. There are 9 planets in our solar system. Each faithfully orbits around the sun every day. The sun is a star in our Milky Way. The Milky Way has 200 billion more stars that are just like the sun. Planets and moons orbit around each of them. God has a name for every one of them. In addition to that, there are 100 trillion galaxies in the universe, each with 200 billion stars. So vast. And if God can operate such vastness out there, then He can navigate the details of our puny lives. Our responsibility is to place our hand in His every day and resist the urge to pull it out. My friends, I trust this blog and this podcast are helping you in your walk with the Lord. If I can be of further assistance to you, shoot me an email at BYoungMinistry@gmail.com. Hey, have a great day.